The sport of off-road racing is full of incredible stories, wild characters, legends, and even villains. We cover it all on offroadracer.com, but there's only so much we can put down in an article. Sometimes we have to dig a little deeper, and that means sitting down with some of our industry's most influential characters and hitting record. Welcome to the Off-Road Racer podcast, a Mad Media production, made exclusively for offroadracer.com. Each month, we'll go beyond the dirt into the homes, shops, and lives of the most interesting and game-changing icons of our sport. You'll hear about their history, success, failure, and everything in between as we pull back the curtain and reveal the stories of their lives. I'm your host, Matt Martelli, and this is the Off-Road Racer podcast. I'm Matt Martelli. This is the Off-Road Racer podcast, and I'm here with my good friend Alex Striler. What's up, man?
Yeah, it's good to be here, man.
Yeah, no, I'm glad.
It's growing.
Yeah,
cool.
no, it's cool. It's funny. You and I have like a funny and long history together. We both did work with the Osiris group, right? Mm-hmm. And we didn't even know about it until later on. We're like, hey, did you work at Osiris? Did you work at Osiris? Yeah, but a big background in action sports. And you know, you and I talk about it a lot of like how we feel like that really helped us in motorsports.
100%, because of the progressive attitude of action sports. You know, if you have stick and ball sports, one team wins and one team loses, and everybody wears the same outfit, usually some kind of a jersey. You have numbers. You have a coach telling you what to do. You have a coach telling you what play to make. Action sports are different. Action sports, you can leave your backyard, you jump on a bike, jump on a skateboard, a motorcycle, and you can go ride. And if you fall, you get back up. It's about progression. You're competing against yourself more so than another team.
Yeah.
So in action sports, there are no losers. And motorsports are very similar to that in that if you're always trying to do better and race faster and tune your car better, then it's about progression as well. So there's a lot of crossover with action sports and motorsports.
Yeah, I mean, especially in the early days, like we had then re-met each other back in the core days in championship off-road racing and short course. You know, what for me, I'd already kind of made the transition out of action sports into motorsports. But what was it like for you to make that jump?
So I had a friend who I went to college with. We coincidentally ended up at MBA school together, so we spent a lot of time in finance classes, and he got hired on by Jim Baldwin to run CORP. When Jim Baldwin acquired the Championship Off-Road Racing Series, he moved it from the Midwest to Newport Beach, and my friend happened to know Jason Baldwin. They were good friends, neighbors, I think. So, or they went to church together, and so they hired my friend Piero to run the series. But Piero had zero motorsports, zero off-road experience. He's just a good guy, very smart. So he called me up and said, hey, you're with a shoe company, but we intend to have revenue of this new off-road racing series that's going to way exceed your shoe sales. And then he started talking numbers with me, and that year, if I remember right, Dale Earnhardt Jr. made $25 million from sponsorship.
Yep.
And that was relatively close to the gross revenue of the company I was with, Cyrus Shoes. It's like, so if one person can make that much versus a whole brand, I was interested. And so he recruited me over. I was employee number 2 at West Coast Championship Off-Road Racing. My goal was to help him build it. And it was strategic on his part because when I was with Osiris, I was in the action sports industry, skateboarding, surfing, freestyle motocross. Rally wasn't big at that point, but BMX was. And so we were bringing in athletes that were from X Games and the Warp Tour, and there was another series at the time called the Invert 2000, brought those athletes over to compete in CORP. And that's when the Superlight class actually was started. Yeah. So that we would bring in athletes and celebrities to try to draw crowds. And then you bring in a Monster-sponsored athlete. Well, Monster usually follows. You bring in a Red Bull athlete, Red Bull follows.
It was really exciting and interesting time. And I just remember there were so many light bulb moments. Yeah. And one of them was the action sports athletes because, you know, one of the problems with action sports is that you age out relatively young, right? So here you are, and this was a lot of this was pre-social media. So if you're Jeremy McGrath and you've had this, you know, fantastic career and you have a following, like, do you just retire and shut everything off and stop making money? Well, I guess if you saved enough money and you've invested it, you could probably do that. But like, it's a waste, right? You've like built this house and now you're like, oh, I'm not going to turn the lights on anymore, you know? So I saw that bridge of like, you know, the Twitches and the Degans and, you know, especially the motorsports guys. But even, you know, for us in rally, like when Mira showed interest in racing, I remember going like, oh God, this is going to be huge. You know, so that was definitely a light bulb moment. And still to this day, I talk to action sports athletes. I'm like, what are you going to do when you're 50? Right?
What are you gonna do when you're 30?
Yeah, what are you gonna do when you're 30? Because you can keep doing this well into. I mean, when you look at like Rossler's in his 60s,
Right.
and he's still, you know, top competitor, right? So yeah, you know, that was one of the light bulb moments for sure.
And it's cool because action sports brings an element of style and creativity, which gives it art, and people can identify with style and creativity. Skateboarding led the fashion of clothing for a long time. Skateboarders, they were the fashion forward. Like, you know, Vans, great example. DC shoes, back at the time of Osiris.
Yep.
And as skateboarders and action sports athletes were wearing these brands, the consumers would then follow, which built the brands.
Yeah.
Vans wouldn't be today what it is if it wasn't for skateboarding.
Oh, 100%. 100%. Yeah, it was interesting. And so, you know, being in early on short course racing, on that evolution of that, you know, I'm sure it was stressful because you're like, we got to go from zero to something.
Yeah.
And you're convincing somebody of like to spend money in something that's an unproven model. But it must have been exciting, you know?
It was exciting, but back then also the internet wasn't what it is today. So back then television was still dominant.
Sure.
And our competitive advantage was that we had a budget to go on NBC. And back then, Speed Channel was airing most of the off-road races. And when we were able to take it to NBC and NBC Sports, that's when we knew we'd have a larger audience. And so television was a primary driver of growth back in those days.
Yeah.
By putting it on the big network, it definitely attracted not just more drivers and teams who wanted to gain that visibility and now realizing, oh, this is a serious sport. I can make money here. But it brought in sponsors that wanted that national visibility through their teams on television.
Well, and the TV was great. Like that's, you know, Markham and his group, you know, and they were employing, you know, new technologies like the bat cam.
Bat cam,
right?
That was cool. I sold that to Monster Energy. That was my first really big sponsorship. $650,000 I think Monster paid for that, the bat cam. That was cool.
It was worth it because back there were no drones at that point.
The footage was amazing.
You couldn't get that shot. And I remember going over the tech of it, and you know, it was basically the fastest accelerating camera that existed at the point, because before that the only thing that they would use a camera like that was football, and it's just a dude running, so he wasn't that fast. Now you have a Pro 4
coming right at you.
Yeah.
Jason had it where the camera would approach the cars, the Pro 4. It was insane.
Yeah.
I remember watching that footage for the first time, and I was like, oh, this is going to go big.
I remember
This is so cool.
I remember a shot from the front section, the whoops, and at Chula Vista, and the bat cam was running alongside of the trucks, and you could see the suspension work.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember seeing that and being like, this is it. This is the moment where everybody can understand what we do.
And if you think about it, back then everything was tape delay because we were just recording onto GoPros or chip cards. And now you can live stream that.
Yeah.
And so the technology, once again, has taken a leap forward in what you can view and see on live stream. And, you know, the viewer experience is now live, no longer tape delayed or recorded.
Right. Which is incredible. I mean, we've taken advantage of it with our live stream. But, yeah, so, you know, COR's happening, it's growing, it's blowing up, and then it just falls flat.
Man, I didn't see that one coming. Nobody saw that one coming.
Yeah, so the economy crashes. Baldwin's are, you know, heavily into real estate, which goes south really fast.
And it was more than that. It was, so we learned after the fact that Jim was actually funding championship off-road racing with a line of credit from Lehman Brothers. And, you know, my background is actually finance. In 1992, I joined Bear Stearns, an investment bank, and Lehman Brothers was one of our competitors.
Right.
And we sold fixed income securities. Those are, fixed income means bonds, and the securities, you know, at the time were just assets. But I was literally selling junk bonds, first mortgage securities, CMOs, collateralized mortgage obligations. And that CMO market was one where companies like Bear Stearns and Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch, they came in and they repackaged mortgage finances into tranches and sold out those tranches to investors. It's a little bit complicated, but when the mortgage market collapsed, all of those institutional investors that were sitting on portfolios of collateralized mortgage obligation bonds, they all
Dead,
collapsed.
basically.
So Lehman was the biggest. Bear Stearns was second. Both companies went bankrupt. My company, where I worked for up until 1998, went bankrupt in 2008. It was bought by J.P. Morgan. I was gone for 10 years at that point. But Lehman Brothers collapsed, totally folded. Nobody came to its rescue. And so the line of credit that Baldwin had to fund CORP, that dissolved overnight. One day, honestly, the story, Matt, is I went to Newport Beach. I'm walking in the office. I thought I was early that day because there's not too many cars in the parking lot, and I couldn't open the door. I'm like, that's weird. How can I be first one here? I came up from San Diego. They just locked the doors and closed it. And then I called and said, nope, company's dissolved. It was that kind of a shock. It was a bummer, too, because a lot of people were owed a lot of money. Baldwin owed me $132,000, almost bankrupted my family at the time because he started slow paying invoices. I was a contractor to sell sponsorships. First, I was an employee, and then we changed it to me being a contractor for him. So he started slow paying invoices, just like with Jason. Jason got hurt the most.
Yeah, he got crushed.
His family's business got crushed.
Yeah.
I'm glad that he's doing work for you now. He's kicking ass.
That's the thing is like Markham is an off-roader, right? Yeah. And so like, okay, so something bad happens related to off-road. That doesn't mean you're no longer interested in it. I mean, that was one of the things, like him and I being friends, like I appreciated his passion for off-road racing, and you could see it in the coverage. Yeah. You could see, and that was something that was really remarkable to me, was that when you have somebody in a decision-making position, especially related to content, that gives a shit about what the story is and what the images are and how you're doing it, and that was Jason definitely did that. He raised the bar for off-road content during that era, and I remember for years I was like gonna use the back cam, but I think it was 150 grand to pull that thing out, and we never pulled it out. But unfortunately, drones came along.
Yeah, there you go.
much more economical, and now that's a big part of our coverage. But you went on, so CORP crashes, it's done, and then Lucas Oil kind of picks up the pieces, and then you went to work with Lucas.
I did. I started with Lucas, I think, in 2011.
But in between that, you wrote the first book, right?
I wrote a book that was my explanation of the action sports industry, and I wrote it specifically at the time with a Wall Street market in mind. I was writing to the fund managers and the investors who I worked with on Wall Street, hoping to enlighten them to an opportunity to invest in action sports, mostly in the West Coast, because that's where it was growing from. X Games were just starting to come out.
Right.
So I wrote an explanation of action sports. I called it X-Planation. Back then, we had a nation that played in X Games, Xbox, Extreme. Everything was X back then.
Yeah.
And so I wrote it's mostly a marketing book to educate the investors on the opportunity to invest in action sports. I self-published, so it sold a few thousand copies. It didn't go big, but it got the attention of a guy at Lucas Oil named Bob Pattison, who read the book. I got a call from Bob and says, hey, can we talk? And so he literally offered me a job in that first meeting after he read the book, and goes, I like this approach. I like what the way you view things. Do you think you can help us grow this off-road series that we acquired? And it wasn't just the off-road series. The Lucas Oil had a program at the time called Team Lucas, which was consolidating all of the motorsports that Lucas was involved with, from late model dirt to modified sprint cars, drag boats, pro pulling, tractor pulls, and consolidated all that into one program. Right. And it was packaged together to sell to brands to bring them into motorsports. Right. Like Continental Tire, Geico Insurance, and Rockstar was a pretty big one. I actually introduced Rockstar to Lucas and introduced them to Bob at Lucas. And then right after Rockstar did the deal, I joined Lucas Oil.
Yeah, it was interesting, too, because the way it was packaged created way more value than really what the brands were paying for. I mean, I got to look at some of those deals, and I'm like, I remember laughing, going, if you guys don't do this deal, you're stupid.
Exactly.
Right? And especially for brands like Rockstar, because Rockstar was a international slash global brand. And as much as, we can be like, hey, we're the cool guys, we're off-road racing, there's tractor pulling going on, and that is a way to reach a market, right? That guy is your customer for Rockstar. So if you want that guy in Alabama to walk into a AM/PM or whatever his version of the local store is and buy your drink, you better talk to him at his level. And unfortunately, that guy wasn't watching off-road racing; he was watching tractor pulling.
Yes, and a lot of that is also when a new brand is in a new market, then if that brand stands alongside legacy brands that are in that market, the market lets them in.
Yeah.
Wing Lam said it best. Wing Lam owns Wahoo's Fish Tacos. He says, if you're going to go surf Pipeline, show up with Jerry Lopez, and the locals will let you drop in and catch a wave. If you're going to go to Encinitas and skate the Y, show up with Tony Hawk. The locals will let you drop in. Otherwise, you're never going to get in. If you're going to try to market to the motorsports community, and you're a beverage, you're sugar water, show up with legacy brands that are in motorsports already.
Sure.
So a lot of that was the brands wanting to position alongside Lucas Oil, which had a big presence in racing, and that in turn gave it credibility to the market. So if you are entering a new market, you show up alongside strong partners, instantly you're perceived to be next to them and alongside them and of the same caliber.
Totally. It's interesting to understand that idea.
Yeah,
and
deep.
then also see the ebb and flow of like currently right now, Lucas Oil's barely in off-road, which is to me a huge mistake, right? Because they really controlled a large portion of that market, predominantly on the West Coast, which then defines trends and culture. And by them letting off that gas pedal entirely, it's like they're just giving that market away to competitors.
Yeah, it's unfortunate, and it's the investment that the industry lost when Lucas sort of exited off-road. It took a hit,
Yeah,
but it recovered real quick.
yeah.
So
It's interesting because again, like being in the position that we're in and being promoters and so invested in desert racing, there was a lot of time where I was looking at short course going, man, it's a better product. It's more attainable. It's all these things, and I'm like, if I was a sponsor, that seems like an easier, thing to do.
amen.
But what I learned, over watching it succeed and fail and succeed and fail, and succeed to fail again, right, is that two things. One is that short course racing is a show, right? It is connected to off-road culture in a two-step kind of way, but desert racing is a culture, right? Like if we get hit with lightning right now, people are going riding this weekend, right? So that's a big difference. And then two, short course was always meant to be and was connected to desert racing as part of the culture. And so, that's one thing that I never understood about Lucas is like, I remember pitching them on desert stuff going, you guys, you should also be involved with this and leverage off this. And they're like, nope, we're good with short course. So
It was at the time the marketing director of Lucas Oil, and might still be with the company today. They had never been to a single off-road race. So part of the problem in attracting sponsors is if you're just pitching them on something they haven't experienced, it's a tough sales pitch. You have to get them to go out to the event, to participate, to be part of it so they can feel it. And if they don't, it's a very, very, very hard pitch. And, it goes in line with you can't market from inside an office. The marketing team at Lucas at the time, they sat in an office and they were behind desks and computers all day long. And,
Sure.
and they marketed from inside Lucas Oil. Very rarely were they in the field. The Team Lucas program I was part of, we were the field marketers. We were out shaking hands, looking in eyes, telling the brand story. And that's what companies and brands need to do today. They need to go in, meet people in person, face to face, engage, activate, tell stories, because that's word of mouth is the best marketing. That's the only way you're going to spread the story of the brand so people remember it. But if a marketing director can't go to all the events that are out there, and you can't be everywhere all at once, there's the perfect case of why you need to hire someone to do it for you or partner with somebody to do it for you. And that's why sponsorships are so powerful, is if a company's marketing director can't attend an event, but there's a team that's going to race in a geographical area or at that event, let's say, that marketing director can use the team as their extension of marketing in the field. then they can just sponsor that team or that event, and it becomes their marketing. So good marketing directors have agents in the field everywhere they want to reach new customers, and therein lies sponsorship. That's why sponsorship is such a valuable tool, is because a team can represent a brand where the brand doesn't have resources to market or create content or sell or tell their story.
Well, and do it in a way that's absolutely authentic, you know?
Because they're credible. You know,
Yeah.
you're showing up as somebody who's in the industry, a race team who's in the industry, as opposed to putting up a banner and saying, look, you know, we are extreme sports now. We are extreme. Can't use the word extreme. You know, if as soon as somebody says the word extreme sports, you know that they're not. It's action sports.
Yeah, it's funny because, again, like you have a unique experience set in that, you know, you've worked both on the brand side and then, you know, on the event side, and then closely with athletes as well.
I work a lot with athletes now because the opportunity to share the knowledge, you know, I want to retire soon. I'm getting old. I'm not aging out by any means because we have a desert house. We go riding all the time. But when it comes to working for the rest of my life, I want to start spending time with my grandchildren. I'm a grandpa now. My parents are still alive, so I want to spend as much time with them as I can. So instead of being on the phone selling sponsorships all day long, I'm now educating teams and drivers and properties on how to do it, teaching them what I learned along the way. It's that story of, instead of giving someone fish, teach them how to fish.
Sure.
I'm just trying to spread the word so that if all motorsports, if all athletes and teams in motorsports were better funded, whether it's 10, 20, 30, 100% more this year than last, motorsports will grow. But if money comes in from one big sponsors and only trickles down to a handful of people or one series, it very rarely reaches all the athletes. So my goal is to equip all the motorsports teams and athletes with the knowledge that'll at least teach them and educate them on what brands seek from sponsorship.
Right.
It's not what you think anymore. Back when I started with CORP, it was television exposure. You could be on a big 3 TV network, and that's what brands wanted. Today, you don't even have to race to get sponsored. Today, you just have to have a connection with a consumer that the brand doesn't have.
Right.
You know, we live in this world where there's an electronic highway between all consumers and all companies. You and I are connected. You and every company out there is connected. The only thing that stops you from being connected to somebody is a door, or usually a firewall. You have to send someone a message or an email or a phone call or a text. And if they read it or open it, that's up to them. Well, how do you get them to open that and read it and engage your message? That's the door I'm talking about. That's what brands want you to do. Is brands want you to connect those dots and open those doors to their customers. And if you can do that, and anybody can do that nowadays, then you can create value for brands so that hopefully they sponsor you. And then that's how motorsports grows. Is that every team is better funded.
Well, I agree, and I add some things to that. I think that the experiential part of it becomes super critical, you know, now more than ever, because we're at this point where, you know, the cost of reaching somebody on social media has got so high that in many cases, the old school, the analog ways are better, right? So, like, I was having this debate with Vipe Desai, and, you know, kind of the mutual conclusion that we came to is that it would be better for him, as he's running the Surf Association, to create a magazine and hand that to a kid. The cost of doing that,
like Automatic Magazine back in the day, remember that?
But like have that visceral, you know, tactile. Here's a magazine, kid. Flip through it. That's not a death scroll, right? It's much more valuable, and maybe it gets passed on to another kid. Maybe it stays on his, you know, on his bedroom floor for a couple months, whatever it is, right? But we've gone like full circle. And then the, like you were talking about, like the personal experiences, right? Like, you know, like what we do in our VIP area, I see, you know, a lot of athletes. Like Casey Curry is a very, very good at this of like taking his sponsors and making sure they have these experiences with them. So they feel like they're part of the gang, you know, and then it becomes personal, and it's not just about, you know, how many posts did he do this week, right? It's a bigger, more meaningful relationship.
Casey's good at putting brands and sponsors together. He's outstanding at that. But he also takes it to another level where back in the day, if with traditional media, you just had to win races or get on the podium and you would get visibility and you'd be picked up in the media and your sponsors would get exposure. And that's what was sold, exposure. Today, you not only have to race, today racers have to be marketers. And that's what Casey's good at. Casey, because he has a family business, obviously, they understand marketing. So it takes racing to a whole new level if you understand marketing as well as knowing how to tune your car and drive it. Because it's the marketing is where the money's going to come from.
Sure.
The driving and the racing, that'll get you credibility, glory, maybe some payouts, some purses, and then hopefully you win a championship.
Right.
But the money will come from the marketing that you do.
Right.
And so you need to learn how to be a good marketer because then brands will want to attach themselves to you and you are their entry into the market where they don't reach people.
I mean, the other side of that paradigm is Ken Block, right? So, you know, we had a hand in you know, the beginning of Ken Block and Gymkhana. And what was interesting about it is it really got to a point where, like, nobody wanted him to race. You know, the sponsors are going, hey, man, we don't need you to race. We don't want you to race. We don't want our logo on your race car. We want you to continue to focus on building content and do more Gymkhanas, right? And it was a very interesting and telling thing because, you know, prior to that, it was like, oh, man, if he doesn't win this race, we're going to lose his sponsorship and blah, 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 blah. So it really unlocked the value of social media. Now going forward, I think that, you know, it's both, right? It's like, go prove it on the track. Tell everybody what you did. Show everybody what you did. Let them in. You know, the Jerry Maguire thing. Let them love you, right? Let them learn who you are and as a person and as a character. But then activate. Because, like, if you're a racer and you've got, let's just say 6 performances a year, right? What are you going to do on the other 360 days, right? Or 359 days, right? Like, I just sat on a conference and was speaking, and it was the last question that was asked by the audience was this kid, and it was great because I had NASCAR sitting on one side of me and Formula One sitting on the other side of me.
Wow.
And I let them answer the question first, and the kid's question was, what do you see as the future of you know, motorsports media? And they both answered was relatively the same thing. It was like, hey, Drive to Survive, we're going to do more storytelling stuff, which has worked, right? It has grown them. So it's not a wrong answer. But what I said is I asked him a question. I said, do you wake up in the morning and death scroll and expect to see content from each one of the racers that you follow? And he goes, yeah. And I go, that's what we're going to do.
There you go.
Right? We're going to build content around our racers and help them and, you know, do more storytelling that way in between the races.
Well, you started that with Gymkhana and Ken Block. You literally started it. Yeah. And I think that's when we went on stage. It was like 2007 or 8. You and I were on stage at a pre-X Games presentation, and we talked about action sports and why it was so important. That's when Ken Block was just becoming famous, not for DC shoes. People knew him for DC, but consumers were now knowing him for he was first in a Subaru, then a Ford, the Gymkhana videos. That's when we realized you don't have to race anymore to create value for sponsors. No. Ford came in and sponsored him. You know, he had the Fiesta program.
It wasn't based on his winnings.
Yeah, I don't think he ever won.
He did. He won.
Not before that.
He won he won a lot of championships, and he won a lot of races, but because those races and that league of rally did such a poor job marketing, it didn't mean anything.
Oh yeah,
right. So it's like this thing where it's like, you know, you won the local karate tournament. Nobody cares. All anybody cares about is where is your ranking in the UFC, right?
That's true.
So that's the mindset. So that's why we did Gymkhana, was to get that attention. But again, action sports, right?
And it proved something too, though. Is what that proved and what it demonstrated is that you don't have to wait for the media to come to you to tell your story. You can create your own media. And Humpy Wheeler first said it. He said, "Look, if you're not getting in the news, if they're not writing about you, write something for your local newspaper, because the local paper usually feeds the national or the regional paper, the state paper. The state paper feeds the regional feeds national, and then it goes global. So." It's a great example because when my kids were all in high school, even grade school, they were in sports. And if they did something really exceptional or if their team had an outstanding game, I would write a little story, submit it to the Valley Roadrunner, They printed every story I ever wrote, everyone without exception. So I created media for my children who were in team sports in grade and high school. So if I can do it in local media and you're a professional race team and you have real sponsors, you can create your own media too. Gymkhana was media in a artistic, creative motion way.
Yeah.
Instead of it being in print, it was visual.
Well,
and it was artistic.
We had
It was
learned
interesting.
it. Absolutely. We had learned it from skateboarding. It's a skate video with a car.
Exactly, yeah.
It
Eighth
was
Street
like
all over again.
it was in skateboarding you had to figure out how to get people's attention. Again, this was pre-social media. So we would create skate films, right? And it was, now looking back at them, it's like they're rudimentary,
That's exactly
marketing
right.
tools that really was branded content because all the skateboarders wore your shoe, your shirt, your hat, you know what I mean? And it worked. And it's interesting because I am excited for the future. We have a lot of young kids who have begun to understand this. And, they start racing with us at 6 years old.
Isn't that crazy?
So then by the time they're teenagers, it's like not only are they masters at racing, but they're masters at marketing because they've grown up in this world, right? And they know, hey, I've got to have this on 24/7 and be creating content a la Ken Block, right? Now, Ken developed far beyond what we started with, and he built a whole team around him and was always masterminding these different projects at different levels, right? So tremendously smart marketer, right? And that was the luxury of the relationship is like, especially in the beginning, it's like him and I would get in a room and brainstorm, and it was just like, holy shit, like we create too much stuff that was impossible to accomplish, but if we got 1/10 of it done, that was like years more than what anybody else was doing.
True.
But what's crazy to me about it is that everything that we did, everything that Ken did, it was visible, and yet people still aren't doing it.
Well, you're using unique angles and perspective, and you made it artistic. You made it creative. Racing always traditionally was just showing cars going around a track, and you got winning, and exactly. And okay, let the driver say something about his sponsors. And it was so cookie cutter and template oriented. It was the same thing over and over. You took it to a whole new level where you made it visual art that was compelling, and people would look at that and go, wow, And it's think about the consumer psychologies. Things go viral because we learn things that we never heard before.
Sure.
People like to learn. You see things that you've never seen before. If you hear the same joke over and over and over, joke gets old. But if you hear a new joke, wow, now you want to tell people. So you see things, you hear things, you experience things. That's what makes it go viral. And those videos were a new visual perspective on what a driver can do instead of just race.
Yeah.
And that started opening up minds and eyeballs like, oh, wow, I can do that too.
Yeah.
And then R.J. Anderson with the Polaris, same concept. It
BJ with his videos, yeah.
And
then a lot
now
of
you see them everywhere.
you do, but like a lot of them aren't very impressive, right? And it's because
Well, they're copying. Instead of being unique and individual, they're copying. You guys did it first.
Well, we did it first in this genre. We had a lot of influence, like films like Climb Dance and Rendezvous, and all the things that influenced us. I mean, all the trucks and cars jumping in movies, and BMX and everything influenced us. But what's interesting to me now is that now you're starting to see these young kids really get it and build content around themselves and understand, like, all right, if you're a race team, what does that mean? That means you're a brand.
Yes,
And
exactly.
so if you're going to spend $40,000 on a transmission, you damn well better spend $40,000 a year on your content, because that is equally as valuable as, if not more, really more than your race wins.
That's what you and I have been pitching for a decade.
Yeah.
And I don't think we're the only ones saying it, but we're the only ones I've heard say it, is you need to spend as much money in marketing as you are on almost everything else you're doing. If a sponsor gives you, let's say, $100,000 or $50,000, take a nice percentage of that and reinvest in marketing of that sponsor, maybe in traditional media. Maybe just buy a newspaper ad, a billboard, maybe invest in better camera equipment so you can create more content. Do something for your sponsor with that money other than just pay yourself and build a faster car.
Yeah.
Because they're investing you to market on their behalf, and they want you to come up with ways to market that they haven't thought about. Otherwise, they'd be doing it without you.
Right.
So find a way to use the sponsor's money to create marketing for that sponsor. And if it's successful, they'll re-sponsor. They'll come back and do it again.
And in a lot of ways, because we deal with this on the event side too, is like you can do things that the sponsor can't. Like a lot of sponsors are very encumbered by legality and their board.
Exclusivity.
And, just all kinds of like nauseating, like don't show them without gloves on, whatever it is, right? And you're like, dude, like that's not the reality of the world. Like, so you have this opportunity to be a conduit for interesting content, and it's funny because I do come across stuff where I'm like, that was pretty cool what that kid did or what that team did. Like wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah.
Attention Off-Road Nation. The Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship comes roaring through Parker, Vegas, and Barstow in 2024. It's 3 of the most prestigious and competitive off-road races in the sport. It all starts with the return of the Parker 400 in beautiful Arizona, January 10th through the 14th. Then it's the biggest, baddest, most grueling off-road race on the planet. The BF Goodrich Tires Mint 400 comes roaring back into Sin City, Las Vegas, March 6th through the 10th. And finally, the climactic conclusion of the Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship, the California 300, returns to Barstow, October 2nd through the 6th. Visit unlimitedoffroadracing.com for complete details. The 2024 Unlimited Off-Road Racing Championship is here.
Shreddy's doing a lot of that now.
Yeah, he is. I mean, Blake's a hustler and a grinder, and there's things he does that I'm like, I don't understand.
Cool. Yeah,
but then there's other things I'm like, this is great, right? But when I look at it, I go, like the Mint, right? We had 460 teams race with us.
Nice.
I want all of them to be, Blake Wilkie's, right? And if we only get like 50%, 30% of them that are, building content at that level, we're in good shape. Because again, like I compare our culture, our sport to other sports, and I go, the cool thing is like, yeah, F1's badass, but it's only 10 dudes.
Right.
It's only 10 dudes. We have classes of vehicles that are way bigger than that, right? So let alone the whole race field. So that's the thing that I get excited about. There's all sorts of different characters, different stories, different demographics. We've got white people, Mexicans, Asians, like, this huge cross section of really that represents America, right? And we want to expose that through this storytelling, through the league, but also through their social media.
A lot of it goes back to you want to market to the man in the moment. Where I'll give you a quick example. As I get up in the morning, this is, let's say, before my kids are all adults now, they're all out, but it was when I got up in the morning and I came downstairs and I'm just a single man, made a cup of coffee. Then my wife wakes up, and now I'm my husband's, and now we're having breakfast together. Kids wake up. Okay, now I'm a dad. Drive them to school. I'm a chauffeur. After school, maybe I'm helping to coach Little League. Now I'm a coach for a while. And then come home, maybe we wrench on the motorcycles a little bit. Now I'm a mechanic. And, if you're Starbucks coffee, don't market to me while I'm wrenching on my bikes. If you're Sealy mattress, don't market to me when I'm, coaching Little League. Market to the man in the moment. And at a track, spectators come from a variety of backgrounds, but they're all race fans. You're not marketing to the teacher or the construction worker or the officer or the doctor, the lawyer, the professional, the businessman. You're not marketing to that person in the grandstands. You're marketing to the race fan. That's
right.
The one common element that they have in common. And if you can use that, then you can reach more people, especially through race teams. Because Blake has a completely different set of fans than, let's say, another driver out there who's, let's say, BJ Baldwin.
Yeah.
Or let's say the Herps, Casey Curry. They all have different fan bases. And so by marketing through each one, you're reaching their fans.
Right.
And you're marketing, and then that common connection is the racing.
Right.
So you're not trying to market to a doctor or to a lawyer. You're marketing to a race fan.
100%. Yeah, for you, like, having gone through both being on the brand side, being pitch sponsorship, then being on the the selling side and pitching sponsorship, and now, really being more like this oracle position of where you're like, hey, what you're doing now with your sponsorship summits is you're bringing brands in communication with athletes in a way that's very like honest, right? So instead of this bullshit dance that we all end up doing, like, what do you want? What do you want? I don't know. How much money? Like
what do you charge? What do you charge for sponsorship?
Let's just get to it, right? And that's what's cool about what you're doing is you have these sponsorship summits where, all the guys who would sponsor an athlete tell everybody, hey, this is what I'm looking for.
Exactly.
Right? Like,
sometimes it's important to know what a brand wants, and that's what the summits are designed to do. It's not me saying it. Yeah. I'm doing what you're doing here with me is you're pulling information out of me. So I pull information out of my guests, my panelists. I speak to marketing directors and sponsorship directors of a number of companies, and I ask them, what do you want from sponsorship? How do I get sponsored by you? Are you looking for more teams? If a team wants to approach you, how do they get a hold of you? Do you look at decks? Do you look at proposals? Should I send an email? What's my approach to you? How do I get to know you better? How can I network with you? And in the words of these marketing directors, they're describing that. And then different companies and different marketing directors, they all have different answers. You would think that all the marketing directors are going to say the same thing. Oh, this is what I'm looking for. Create 5-to-1 ROI, blah, blah. No, it's not. They're all different.
Yeah.
Manufacturers, they want to prove functionality. They have a new product coming out. Maybe they need more distribution in certain distribution channels. So as a driver, you can help. If you're sponsored by them, you can help get them into certain stores. Retailers, Target, Walmart, they want foot traffic into their stores. O'Reilly's. Everybody knows O'Reilly's. They don't need logo exposure.
Right.
What they need you to educate them where the locations are,
yeah.
what deals they might have at a certain moment. Maybe go on their website and use a coupon. They want you to buy something from them.
Yeah.
Beverage companies, food companies, they typically want sampling. So if you're going to Monster Energy or Coca-Cola and you say, hey, sponsor me, I'll offer you exposure. They don't need exposure. Everybody in the world knows those brands. Exposure is the last thing they need. But they might need content, and they have a content portal that they like you to upload content into that they can then use in marketing. They'll use it at point-of-purchase displays. They'll use it on calendars. They'll use it in their marketing to distributors, to retailers. So by knowing that different companies have different needs, when you approach a company, think about what does that company need from racing, or what does that company need from you? How can you help them in their marketing? And then not only that, but often you have a manufacturer that wants to sell to an end customer. But sometimes they sell to a distributor first. The distributor sells to a retailer. The retailer sells to the end customer. Sometimes the manufacturer sells direct. So you have to market not just for the end consumer to create the demand, but you have to keep the consistency of that marketing the same across all the channels.
Sure.
You can't market as the cheap, low-cost brand to the end consumer and then tell your distributor and your retailer that you're a luxury brand. It doesn't work that way.
Right.
You need to have the consistency in the marketing across all the distribution channels. And that is what a lot of teams they don't realize it or they don't think about it because they're busy building cars and racing. So that's what the sponsorship summits are designed to do, is to literally let the marketing directors of these brands tell the attendees in attendance what it is they're looking for and how to approach them. And so far, it's been quite successful.
Yeah.
I have to say we're growing. It's nice.
It's this distillate or distillation of information, right? And it's very interesting too because you've done a really good job of utilizing digital online technology, right? Because, I guess, incurred by COVID partially.
100%.
But, now it's also like, hey, I can't jump on a plane and fly to Vegas this week to get in front of all these guys, but I can log on online to do it. So I think it's really cool. And I think that, you've had a habit of disseminating really good knowledge with your books and now with your sponsorship summit. And so I really hope, especially the motorsports guys that affect me are paying attention, Yeah,
and they are. I'm seeing quite a bit of successes. One of the things that I see, which is so logical and so easy, you and I, we take it for granted, but I realize that a lot of the new teams I have a membership program, so I speak to a lot of new teams. they don't realize that the assets that they have that are valuable to a sponsor, they just don't. They have this whole race program and they're focusing on their results.
Right.
When in fact, they have a pickup truck.
Right.
And that company needs a pickup truck in a certain geographical region because they need to distribute product maybe to some retailers, or they need to go to certain events. And you have a hauler. Let's say you have a semi. You might even have a RV that the company needs to use. You might have physical assets that could save the company money where they don't have to purchase those themselves. All they have to do is wrap yours or put a logo on it, and then they can use you to do their marketing. You become an ambassador of the brand. And that's where the whole term brand ambassador comes from.
Yeah.
Is they're paying you not to race and get results. They're paying you to represent them in areas where they don't go. And they want to use your resources. If you have a pickup truck, there's a pretty good chance that some sponsor out there that needs wheels in your area is going to sponsor you.
Right.
You just have to find that company.
Right.
Another thing is, if you look at how some of these teams are put together, and in the last off-road summit, I talked about Polaris Factory Racing. Mm-hmm. And this was great. I loved it. It was probably one of my favorite sessions of all times, of all the summits. The panelists were outstanding. But when Travis Clark and Craig Scanlon pieced it together, and Ryan Thomas was the team manager, he puts the program together, they started with Polaris, the main brand. Now, when you go out and buy a Polaris Razor, you're probably going to buy some upgrades. Let's say Rockford Fosgate sound system. Okay,
Yep.
There's an upgrade. You're probably going to buy some wheels.
Yep.
And tires. So Rockford Fosgate, an option. BFG, an option. Method race wheels, an option. Now you've got 40, 50, 60 grand invested in this. Well, you're probably not going to pay cash, so you're going to finance it. So Synchrony Finance is the financing company. When you go to finance something, well, you often need insurance because if it breaks or you crash it, it has to be covered. So then Progressive Insurance comes in. So Travis Clark at Wasserman Media Group started with Polaris, went to BFG and Methods and Rockford Fosgate, went to Synchrony, went to Progressive, pieced it all together, and got all of them to contribute to the program.
Yeah.
And that's very logical. It's smart. One of my members was talking to me recently about he has a manufactured home sponsor.
Right.
But now he's wondering what to do with that. Gee, I got a sponsor. They make manufactured homes. I'm not sure, how to get other sponsors on board. Should I try to call a watch company or a wheel company? And I said, well, let's back up. If you already have the manufactured home, they probably make a lot of homes, so they probably buy a lot of windows, a lot of doors. Who's the window company? Who's the door company?
Yeah.
Who's the floor company?
Who
Who's
makes
the
the
company?
AC?
Who makes the AC? Who makes the appliances?
Yeah.
Let's go after all of those brands, piece them together similar to the Polaris factory deal, and that's how you literally start. Now, it might not always work, but that's the most logical approach with the most likely results.
Well, and I think if you pull a page out of the B2B business that NASCAR's been very successful at, deals are being done in a casual atmosphere, right? Like when you go to a trade show and everybody's in trade show mode and you're walking around with your pitch deck and you're like, hey, sponsor me. They're not there to give you sponsorships. No. They're there to do their job selling. Yes, they're there. There may be opportunity to meet with them, but like it's creating an environment where it almost becomes obvious. And then the real way to do all sales is you're not selling the nail, you're selling the hole.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And it's like, I remember seeing this, I think it was at Charlotte, and, it's like, okay, it's lunchtime. Is everybody hungry? Yeah, everybody's hungry. Well, guess who our sponsor is? What? Oh, it's this hot dog company.
Perfect.
Right?
That's Wahoo's with Monster Energy and the Anaheim Supercross.
Wahoo's was legendary because he became a part of surf culture. Yeah. He went to every little dinky surf contest and gave us all tacos, right? And like they're delicious, they're good for you, and like when I left as a consumer and went looking for fish tacos, he was the first place I was going to. It's funny, and not to be too much of a dick about it, but like, what's the more Rubio's? Okay, so a bunch of Rubios just went under, right? And everybody's like, oh, the economy in California and all this kind of stuff. And I was sitting there and I was like, no, actually, their food sucks, and their presentation sucks, right? And so they didn't, in my view, it wasn't that they failed because of
the mitigating circumstances, it was because they have a subpar product. And I remember sitting with Wing when they, you know, a fish taco was a fish taco. So it wasn't like he invented electricity or something. Right. However, they did come after him, right? And
you've never seen him support motorsports either. When have you ever seen a Rubio's ever in motorsports?
Anything. I haven't seen him support anything.
You go to off-road, you go to rally, you go to Supercross.
But they didn't become a part of the culture. But the point I was trying to make was that it was also a quality issue, right? So yeah, you know, if you're a food brand and you want to become part of a culture, feed them. Don't just put your logo on everything.
And it has an added advantage too. And this is what Wing said. Wing, because I interviewed him for my first book, Explanation of Action Sports, and he said that he participates in, mostly at that time we were writing about Supercross, because he wants to be part of the fun. He wants people to remember the brand when they're having a good time.
Sure.
If you go and you're having a great time at an event and it's fun and it's awesome, the foods that you eat, the beverages that you consume, the brands that you see, all the logos that are around you all become part of that good time. 100%. So next time when you're at the store and you see those logos, you remember them as, oh yeah, I remember them. And they made part of the fun.
But it's even more powerful beyond that, because it's how you consume as part of a culture, right? Like, I remember this with skateboarding and surfing. It was like, I would look at brands and go, I'm not wearing Nike.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Like, that's not for me. That's for all the athlete dorks.
It's got to be Audio, ES, right. Etna, DBS.
Yeah. All the skate brands, right? Yeah. That's who I was. That was my identity. And then same thing with off-road. It's like, I vote with my dollar. And
every purchase is a vote.
Yeah, and I support the brands that support off-road 100%, you know? So yeah, it's very interesting.
But you had also talked about meeting people at the beginning of this conversation, the networking. You don't go to a SEMA or a PRI or an event where there's a sponsor, and as soon as you meet somebody that has marketing in their business card, you hand them a deck and start into a pitch.
No.
Guess what? You just turn them off and you just cut them off forever. That's probably one of the biggest mistakes that I see drivers make is networking takes time. You need to get to know people over months, if not years, for them to get to know you. You don't go on a first date and all of a sudden get married. Very few people do that. Some do, but it doesn't last long usually.
I'm going to use one of my stupid analogies. This is like dating, right? 100%. Because like they know what you want, right? But you have to do it in some sort of graceful way, just they like making moves on a woman. It's like you walk in and you're like, great, let's have sex. The answer is going to be no, unless she's a nefarious woman, right? But sponsors are the same way. It's like, look, this is a relationship. You got to get to know them. You got to show them what you can offer them, vice versa. And, you know, as much as everybody is hot and horny to, you know, cover their race program, it's also looking at like who fits your program, right? Like, what are the things that you can leverage? And like, I was just talking to another race team about this, and they're like, yeah, we run a big construction company and da da da. And I said, what are the things that you buy? And they're like, oh, we buy a ton of tools.
Power tools. Yeah.
I'm like, hey, let me pair you with a tool company. And what if they could give you $250,000 in tools instead of cash? And they're like, well, we're good with that, right? So it's looking at all those things, and you know, it's just
and knowing that, Matt, you can then partner with that power tool company. That's what Rockstar did back in the Makita days.
Makita, yeah.
So Rockstar partnered with Makita because Rockstar's sales force would go to. No, actually, no. Let me take it back. Makita's sales force would go to construction job sites and try to sell the workers on site. You know, hey, come sample these tools. And the guy's like, sorry, you know, we're busy. We're building a house. But then they partnered with Rockstar, and they showed up with cases of cold Rockstar. Hey, anybody want a free drink? Construction stops. Everybody runs over. Oh, by the way, while you're having a nice drink, check out this new power tool, hammer drill. Check out this Sawzall.
Yeah.
And that's a really good door opener. Yep. You know, you're making friends first before you're doing the sales pitch.
Yep.
A lot of people will say, how do I meet new sponsors? Well, it's easy to meet people. It's just hard to stay in touch with them if you've turned them off right away because you're that pesky salesperson.
Yeah, you're too horny for the deal.
You don't want to be a salesperson right off the start.
No.
You just want to get to know them. You want to be their friend. You want to be able to call them on a Sunday afternoon or text them on a Sunday afternoon on their cell phone. And if they answer that call or return your text, now you know that you're close enough where you can propose a deal. And so,
that and like, it's like I always say that as deals get bigger, right, especially once they pass 6 digits, they want to know that you're not going to screw them, because they're starting to spend an amount of money with you that could end their career if things go badly. So just having those relationships of like, hey, I followed through, I'm doing what I'm saying, I'm in general, I'm over delivering. Because again, like that's the thing about marketing yourself as a brand is like, it's putting equity into you, right?
And I can speak firsthand for that. So I sold all the sponsorships for CORP the year that CORP folded. Guess who the sponsors called? Because Baldwin wasn't answering the phone, and they all had my number. And I was like, it's true. I sold the sponsorships. I also got screwed. I got laid off or let go, not paid, and 132 grand later, I'm in as much deep shit as the sponsors were, who were waiting for their money back from CORP, from Jim. He never paid it.
Right.
One brand out there is actually Makita, who did the official power tool. I've never done anything with them since. Yeah. I think, and rightfully so, I totally get it. I did sell that deal, and I probably should have known just how much CORP was struggling. I had no clue. We weren't looking at the numbers.
No.
Baldwin shows up with his giant yacht. We thought he was so super rich. Funds were endless. No clue that it was going to dry up overnight.
Yeah.
And if you do a bad deal that burns somebody, they will not do business with you again.
Yeah.
I learned that one the hard way.
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, again, it's follow through and all that type of, making sure that you're delivering on all the deliverables, right?
Yeah, and only half the season was delivered on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was a real bummer. Bad times in those days.
Yeah, but like now it's interesting because I think there's more opportunity now for athletes and teams to deliver more value and more content. But they have to do the work.
And a lot of that is who they're connected to as well. In a physical world, if let's say you wanted to buy oil for your truck, you're going to buy Amsoil, Mobil, Valvoline, Castrol. You got one brand is going to get the sale.
Sure.
Only one. But in a digital world and in a digital economy, if you're selling a digital product, like a download or a stream or a file or a subscription or a membership, every one of those competitors can also sell that product and get a percentage of the sale.
Yeah.
So what that means is you can all be connected. There is no competition in a digital economy if everybody levers their power, their marketing power, and works together. All these competitors can literally work together.
100%.
And the same goes to race teams that are competing. You can compete against each other, but in the digital universe, which is the viral universe through which we promote, that's the online economy, the digital highway where we post our content. Instead of just posting your own content over and over and over and over, if you started posting content of your competitors and others in the series, and they did it same for you, that's how you rise.
Well, and collaborative marketing. The best example, modern example I can give you of this is Camberg, right? So Camberg, Magnaflow, right?
Camberg, yeah. Rising Tide,
BF Tires, right? Now they have Beast. Like all these brands are working together. We're providing them content. So when we do a content push, it's 5 brands, right?
Yeah, nice.
So it's got a bigger reach. All of them are leveraging off each other's reach. It's good for everybody.
And
right?
that's what teams can learn from the brands, is teams can also market together. People often ask me, because I have virtually zero social media. My son Cole set up a couple accounts on Instagram and a TikTok, but I've never once posted. He's done a few in the past. And one comment I get a lot is like, why am I not on social media more? But I'm not trying to be an influencer.
Right.
There's a big difference between an influencer or an athlete trying to build a personal brand and what I'm doing. I'm trying to create a library of unique, compelling, valuable digital content. My library now has about 65 hours of exclusive, unique content. No one else in the world has it. It's just in my library. So that content should stay valuable forever until it's replaced by more current content. Whereas a post, I might have a post that goes viral, 1 million people see it, 3 days later, it's history, it's done, it's gone. But if you have valuable content, then that will literally, it's like currency. It will grow forever. It's capital.
Yeah.
And so I'm not trying to be an influencer or a creator. Well, I am a creator. I'm creating content, but I'm not an online influencer trying to build a following. What I want is people who appreciate my content to help market that. If you like the videos that I'm posting and the summits that I host, and if you like the podcast, the Meet Sponsors podcast that I'm starting to work on again, then you'll share that with your friends and followers. And as they find value in that, they share it with theirs.
Sure.
So it's this collaborative effort where you don't have to have a following anymore to really create value. You have to create compelling, unique content. Content is still king, and it's becoming way more valuable today.
I somewhat agree with that, right? Because we're operating every day in the digital world, and we've got different strategies for different things that we want to achieve. And the way that we look at it is, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all the short attention span social media, we're just using that to chum, right? Like you're gonna death scroll through something, and that's going to lead you into a bigger conversation, generally on YouTube or on our website.
It's like 2 seconds at a time, right?
Right.
2 seconds. 2 seconds.
So I wish that we lived in a world that was just solely valuing the content, but we've got to battle for attention, and it's changing. Like we were talking about earlier with the success and then failures of social media, of like, now I feel like they're over advertising, they're overdoing a lot, they're being too greedy, right? So I think the value proposition is now switched back, right? And now we're doing things that we used to do 20 years ago, where I'm like, hey, it's more valuable to hand somebody a poster than it is for them to see my Instagram post, right?
Saying the kid with the magazine.
Yeah, the kid with the magazine. So I think I'm really happy that I'm the age that I'm at, right? And that I had to learn all the analog stuff the hard way, and then, move into the digital world. And even as difficult as it is to keep up and understand all the things that are changing in the digital world, like, it's exciting. I remember... And I'm a great example of it, because when we did Gymkhana, we didn't put it on YouTube. We put it out on Flash, Windows. It was like 20 different formats back then that you had to put on a server. And luckily, the guy who owned the server was my friend. And he calls me up and he says, hey, I'm going to do you a favor. Instead of me charging you for, a few $100,000 for all these video downloads that you're getting, go put it on YouTube. And I remember when we put it on YouTube, we were like, we're not like, do we own it? Does YouTube own it? How does this work? Like, it was very confusing. And it went, right? And it became this thing where it was like, oh, now everybody can see it on every device, on every computer.
Forever.
And it's like, do you have Flash, or do you have Windows Media Player? Or it was a nightmare before that, right? So it's very interesting to go from that very beginning to, where we're at now, which is that, everybody's death scrolling, right? Yeah. Everybody that has a level of consumption where it's like, with the people I feel the worst for is like, okay, cool. You just spent $300 million making Game of Thrones, and it's the entire series is consumed in a couple of days. And then everybody's like, okay, what's next? And you're like, oh, man, I don't know. I don't know. We just finished that. Like, we need another year to complete the next.
I could never understand the economics of Netflix.
Yeah.
Some of those shows. I just don't get it yet. Unless they have that many eyeballs.
It's that many eyeballs.
That it's moving so many needles. It's crazy, because it seems like cumulatively off-road, and we have just as many eyeballs.
Well, what's interesting to me about it is the level of consumption. Is that,
right?
Now what we're seeing is like this complete failure of Hollywood, right? Where Hollywood has held its line of like, we're Hollywood and we know what we're doing, and da-da-da-da. Now it's just collapsing.
How many movies did you go to last year?
0. Well, actually 1. I did go to 1. I went to Dune 2. And it was magnificent, and I'm really glad that I went to the IMAX theater. That's how I think cinema should be viewed. But
exactly. But when you were a kid, you probably went to
dozens,
one a month.
Yeah, at least, right? So yeah, but it's also a quality issue, right? It's like there's a lot of junk. There's a lot of this Disneyfication of like, hey, we bought the rights to Superman. Now we're going to do 90 Supermans and all these offshoots of Superman and da-da-da-da. And it's so we can make the Superman dolls and all this bullshit. And I'm like, that's not a good story anymore. and I think consumers are reacting to that, and they're going, yeah, we have that story. What's the other story, right?
Off-road race fans, the third annual California 300 off-road race comes blasting back into Barstow this fall, Thursday, October 3rd through Sunday, October 6th. Don't miss your chance to see hundreds of the country's elite desert off-road racers go door to door on a brutal 300-mile desert race course and witness the exciting conclusion of the unlimited off-road racing championship season. Visit thecalifornia300.com for more information and to purchase spectating, camping, parking, and VIP tickets. The California 300 returns!
So those are American consumers and Western consumers. And there's some interesting numbers. You should run these. I should talk to Josh because I know, and even Killian deals a lot with data, but Josh uses ChatGPT and AI. And I'd be curious to see what the real numbers are now. But I'm going to give you estimates from what I know. There's 7.8 billion people in the world. About 3.5 billion of them are connected. They're online, connected physically with a computer, usually a handheld. Let's say you take out all of the Americans, 300 million that are connected. There's more, but connected 300 million. You still have 3.2 billion connected people out there. Removed everybody in the United States. So that's 10 times more global audience that's connected online than a domestic American audience.
Yeah.
So some of these, what we consider legacy shows, the characters that we grew up with, and how many of these, how many Batman can you have? Well, for foreigners, it might just be their first time, their first experience with that.
Oh, yeah.
And that's interesting because you can take that concept and relate it to sponsorship. If you can show these foreign consumers what your sponsors want them to see because they haven't seen it yet, especially through American, westernized, badass off-road racing, well, now you can be the conduit to, once again, open that door on that electronic highway that makes that connection between the brand and a consumer. Except we're always thinking, when we look for sponsorships, and all of my members and everybody I deal with always thinks of an American consumer. I have a few members in Canada that look at their market, but it opened my eyes to realizing, what about the kid in India or China or Bangladesh? You get kids all over the world who are
100%,
who glorify and glamorize the United States, California especially, and the Western society. Let's give them content through sponsors.
I can give you a really cool anecdote, right? So we did XP1K, I think it was 2, and we were handing over an analytics report. And I to be honest, I didn't really look at the whole thing. I looked at the number. I'm like, okay, we're good. It's whatever millions of views, right? Because players paid us a lot of money. So did a bunch of other brands. So, multi-million-dollar project. I'm like, cool, we're good. We're handing them the report that says we did our job good, right? And there was a woman at the time who worked at Polaris, and she's like, yeah, these numbers are bullshit. And I'm like, what do you mean? She goes, well, there's 250,000 views from Indonesia. She's like, that's
there's my point.
She's like, that's a clickbait farm or whatever she said, right? And I'm like, let me dig deeper, right? So then we went to the next level of analytics to see, is it one part of Indonesia? Is it coming from a farm or something like that? And it wasn't. And so then I'm literally digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And what I found out was that no, what had happened is Indonesia was one of the countries that didn't have good cable laid for internet. So those people weren't online until they got cell phones, right? Smartphones. But then when they got smartphones, they turned into super consumers, right? And they were just like, yeah, right? So those guys, they all consumed our content. But, it was this kind of shocking revelation of the world changed. But, oh, by the way, this piece of content that we made worked in Indonesia.
Yeah, nice.
That's cool.
And that's probably before Starlink even. Can you imagine
it was
now?
way before Starlink. But it was I remember being so stoked on that. Wow, a couple 100,000 people in Indonesia saw what we did and they liked it.
Exactly.
Right? And I'm like, okay, everything's changing.
Now imagine if you have a sponsor that has a digital product that they can click on and purchase, whether it's for 99 cents or $99. They click and it gives them a membership, gives them a subscription, gives them a download, a PDF file, gives them a book, a song, something digital. That's the way sponsorships are going today. Brands are looking for drivers and teams to create those online connections that lead in some type of a transaction that maybe results in some kind of a payment. Doesn't always have to be, because there's a lot about marketing and visibility. But
do you know who Mr. Beast is?
Oh, it's crazy, right?
Okay. So one of the brilliant things that Mr. Beast did is he took his content and translated it to different languages, right? And then he created a separate channel, and he's like, this channel's for Spanish speaking, this channel's for Asian, Chinese, so on and so forth, right?
Brilliant.
The effect of that has been he just completely took over, as the number one really media
content creator.
Well, no, even beyond that. Like, I remember reading one about I think it was Taiwan, where he became not only the number one creator in Taiwan, but he was like the number one media channel in Taiwan, right? And so then, all these businesses are like, hey, we want to get involved with you. And he's like, I didn't even know how to deal with that, right?
But he actually makes his own brands now. He was so successful that instead of bringing in sponsors, because he doesn't like selling sponsorships, he's like, I just put my logo and my name on brands now. They're coming to me, and it's my product, and he's making more money that way, selling his own products.
Yeah, I've seen some of the things that he's done with his burger company and a few things like that. I'm just like, this is so cool to watch. Like, I wish I had more time, because I'd like to go there and see the launch of these things.
The American dream is now the global dream.
Yeah.
You just have to be online, connected, and have compelling, interesting, unique content.
Well, I think that when you talk about off-road, it is a global culture, right? Like, I always tell this story of Killian and I being in Inner Mongolia, and these guys roll up to us, and they have these handmade vehicles with they had hand cut out Monster logos and stuff.
No way. Yeah.
And they're emulating us. And technically they're not supposed to have the internet and see us, but they have their workarounds, right? And it just reminded me of the strength of our culture, that that we can have such an effect on somebody in the middle of the middle of nowhere, that they're emulating us and going, oh yeah, we want to be like the California guys, and here's how they dress, and here's how their cars look, and so on and so forth. And, they had done it with Toyota engine and, basically fence posts, but it was still cool.
And you're introducing them to the American culture, the American lifestyle, the American way. And if a brand positions alongside you, then you're bringing that brand along to
100%.
them, and they become customers of the brand.
100%.
And that's why sponsorships work so well. If they're good sponsorships, then they work. That's the purpose.
Yeah. What in your experience, was there a sponsorship relationship that you're like, okay, this is awesome, it's going to work, and just kind of nailed it?
There's one that didn't work. I can do the opposite. It's when the Ledukes were sponsored by Skyjacker, which is a great suspension company. The McCurries are great people. Lonnie McCurry Jr. was running it at the time, or Senior was running it. Junior runs it now. And the Ledukes were their main team. The Ledukes were enticed by Rockstar that came in. So, and the Skyjacker is a Christian faith-based company. First page of the website, it stated something about, they're faith-based and very good Heartland America, red, white, and blue. Well, Rockstar comes in and wants to sponsor the Ledukes, and they're, black and gold and sex, drugs, rock and roll. And so Skyjacker, I think, had the front of the car, and then Rockstar had the back half. And as some of us were going, I don't know if those sponsors are going to work very well together. If Rockstar is going to promote Skyjacker or vice versa, sponsorship didn't last that long. The Ledukes went with Rockstar because it was much bigger growth for them in terms of media marketing. But I think the Monster teams do outstanding in the way that it's a business transaction. Think of the Herbst Monster, as a primary of the Herbst race team.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have the Off-Road Summit from next month, by the way. It's from the Herbst Race Shop. But Herbst have, 98 convenience stores and gas stations around Arizona, Utah, and Nevada.
Oh, I think it's much more than that. But
whatever it is, a huge number. It probably is a lot more. But there's obviously profits from the sale of Monster drinks through those stores that are going to fund that program. So it's not a sponsor us, will give you exposure. It's a business relationship. It's a transaction. And I'll go back to the Rockstars. Initially, before Monster was involved with Herbst, Rockstar was involved with Herbst.
Yep.
You go to a casino, and that's when Herbst had 3 casinos prior to the big crash. You go to a casino, and what do? They give you free drinks all night, and they want to keep you up. So what better than a Rockstar infused vodka or something? You know? And that way you're gambling all night, you're getting buzzed, you're staying awake. And so they sponsored, back then, Rockstar sponsored the Herps racing.
Yeah.
That then shifted to Monster over time, but those are the ones that make a lot of sense, is when there's a business relationship behind it.
Yeah.
And then the Polaris, I think, goes really well, the factory Polaris, with all the different brands coming together.
Absolutely.
Because it makes so much sense. It's logical.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's very interesting when those, when you can put together those deals that are, have a B2B element and they work for everybody. And then, too, the other part of it that I can't emphasize enough is the experiential part, right? Like, we've had sponsors come on that, look, they don't care about the branding side. They don't care about the brand exposure. They want to come to the Mint, and they want all their people to be in VIP. They want them to have a great time.
Exactly,
They want them to come away with having a great experience.
And be part of the fun. They want to be part of the fun.
In a lot of ways, they're using it as a reward, right? And it doesn't have to be on the scale of Mint. It could be, hey, come hang out in our pit, have a beer, have a hot dog, whatever, and just be a part of the team and have this very unique experience that most people don't get to have.
If you give someone an experience that they've never had, what's the first thing they do? They go tell all their friends about it. Very rare, especially in today's economy. Selfie, post it online, let everybody see, hey, I've never been here before, check it out.
Yeah.
So give people experiences that they can share with their friends and followers, and you're providing them with content. The goal of events and series and races is not just to put on a show for spectators, but to give the spectators a platform where they can create content and share with their friends and families.
Yep.
Because then it goes viral. And if sponsors' logos are sprinkled all throughout, then the sponsors' logos might get picked up in the background.
Yeah.
Most sponsorships are not about exposure anymore. Brands don't need exposure. Young brands that don't have money, they need exposure.
Sure.
But they don't have money, so they're not going to pay for it.
Right.
The bigger brands, they don't need that visibility, but they like being part of a feel-goods environment. So like Wahoo's and, even Monsters, always at events where people are having fun.
Yeah.
So Monster is a brand that is known for having fun and being cool.
Absolutely. You hit a point with a brand like Monster in particular where like they've been involved with off-road racing for decades now.
Greaves.
So now they're part of the culture, right? Like that's the preferred energy drink of off-roaders, right? That's when you walk in the store, in Orange County, you're like, what are you going to have? You're going to have a Monster, right? So it's definitely logical and worthwhile. Have you seen in your experience an activation at an event where you're like, holy shit, these guys nailed it?
So when Makita was the official power tool company or power tool sponsor of Championship Off-Road Racing, Brent Withy, who's running marketing at the time, I think now he's the VP of marketing, he gave all the top teams and all the core employees the giant Makita bag, which was loaded with tools. We all got it. That was in 2006 or 2007. I still use those tools today. I still have them. They're indestructible. They're in my garage. They're old. I've had to replace some batteries. But all the teams that got them, I go to races, and every once in a while, I'll still see a Makita sitting there in the pits. Like, God dang, that worked well.
Sure.
So he came in, didn't just sponsor the series, but he made every team in the series a brand ambassador and a rep by giving them product.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even about logos. It wasn't about banners. It wasn't about them having to post, because we didn't have social media back in those days. It was just about, here are my tools, use them. And if they last a long time, you'll appreciate them, and then you won't throw them away. And guess what?
You'll buy them.
They worked.
Yeah, and you'll buy some the next time. It's interesting, too, because when you look at our strength in desert racing in particular, we have an interesting value, right? Because it's not just the racers, right?
Value is tough.
It's the pit crews. It's all the volunteers. That alone, like the Mint, it's like, okay, 460 teams times each group that supports the team. You're already between 7,000 and 15,000 people, right? And then you add, spectators. Now you're in the, 10, 15, 30,000, 40,000 up, right? But it's interesting because
when you go back to our history in action sports and how we saw trends become created, it started with skateboarders doing it, and then it was the people following the skateboarders, and then it was mainstream audience. And off-road's very much the same way.
100%.
It's funny because I can see parallels now, right?
Trophy carts.
Yeah, the Raptor,
with trophy carts.
right? Like,
oh, there you go. Yeah,
TRX,
good
right?
point.
I was just on Rubicon Trail, and I was like looking at all the products that people were using on their Jeeps, and I know which ones came from off-road racing, in particular shocks, and the ability to extend, a shock to a certain distance. Right, that was the evolution that came through guys like Walker Evans. Right, he was racing off road, and then started going rock crawling. And he goes, "Yeah, if we articulate this far, it's going to yank the shock out. So we need a longer shaft." And blah 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 blah. It was this really logical thing to him that now everybody driving a Jeep has implemented. Right,
and that's where the beauty comes in, is because the testing comes through the teams, the R&D that then eventually, hopefully, makes its way to the OEM, the manufacturer's product. So the race teams, and even in the series, if somebody comes in and sponsors Unlimited Off-Road, they got the Parker 400, they got the Mint 400, they got California 300. Sure, they got 3 events, but they also have your entire production team.
Yeah,
they have your entire staff. You're working on their behalf to create media, to make sure their logo is positioned in a place where that when they activate with the fans at the event, that there's some kind of engagement and the fans remember. So you're not just sponsoring an event, you're using that event's resources.
Yeah.
And you're not just sponsoring a team. If a sponsor comes in and sponsors a team, they get the driver and they get the car and the hauler and maybe the awning, but they get all the family members of that team now to work as marketers at the
100%.
event. So the brand doesn't have to pay for that. They pay for it through the sponsorship. They don't have to send 5 employees to an event, which costs airline. You got travel and expenses. You have all these, and a lot of these marketing directors, they want their weekends. They don't want to spend every weekend at a track or somewhere away from the family.
Yeah.
So if you can give marketing directors their weekends back by them not having to go somewhere, and they're using your resources instead of having to pay for their own, bam, it's logical. It makes sense that they would sponsor you. If you can present it in a way that they understand, that's where the value is. If you're just pitching the logo exposure,
100%.
it's not going to be value.
I mean, it's
value is the partnership.
What I realize is, back at, when we were doing work with ESPN and X Games, right? Being a young skateboarder and seeing ESPN come in, at the beginning I didn't understand. I'm like, what is this? Like, you remember the first X Games, it was like downhill, toboggan sledding, and it's just all this shit that they just threw the wall. Yeah. But then it got distilled out, and it turned into what it is. And what they were very smart about is grouping these like-minded cultures together and making it this one big package, much like Lucas Oil did with their Team Lucas. But one of the big takeaways from being inside of X Games was how they marketed, how it became a gateway to the culture, right? And then we learned this super valuable lesson during COVID when we had to move the Mint. We're like, oh, we got to move the Mint to December. We were terrified. I was like, nobody's going to come race. And then Killian pulled the data, and he goes, Matt, how many of our racers race in Baja? And I was like, 70%. He goes, no, 17%, less than 17%.
I remember that.
And I was blown away. And so, again, we had a challenge that we had to meet. And so we had 8 months. So we're like, what are we going to do now? We're going to not talk about it for 8 months? That's not a good plan. So we decided just to, drop the pedal down and build content and create communication for the next 8 months. And what we learned is that our consumers wanted to hear from us, right? That we had this mindset, like a lot of events, where it's like, well, it's a 3-month window. You have a month going in or 2 months going in and a month afterwards. After that, they don't want to hear about the Mint. That's not true. And also, consumption levels have got to a point where, like, you cannot physically produce enough content to satisfy the demand, right? Now, there's dangerous thing in there, because if you're a deodorant company, they don't expect new content every day, right? Although if I was a deodorant company, that would be a pretty high priority. But from an event group, fortunately, we had the content. We have as Mad Media, we have the production chops to do that. And so we did, and it grew our numbers exponentially.
Excellent.
And it changed the way we look at stuff. And then too, like that lesson coupled with what we've seen F1 do, where it's like, look, F1 isn't a race series. What F1 is a platform for your brand to market, right? And now our brand, Unlimited Off-Road Racing, it's all year round, 24/7, 365 days a year. We have 3 events currently. And the events happen to be California, Nevada, Arizona, which is
nice.
40 million people in a 2.5-hour drive radius. That's a pretty good market. Right. And by the way, they're also the trend-setting market for the United States. So you start adding all these things up and you're like, it's pretty powerful. And once we started understanding that, like, our job as promoters isn't just to put the events on, but it's to be your marketing conduit. Now brands come to us and they're handing us their budget and going, produce all of our content. We're going to deliver that content back to them for their channels. Then all that content is going to be distributed through our channels, right, to reach our audience. And so now it's force multiplied, right?
What's also cool is what you're doing is you're giving drivers and teams that are involved a platform where they can not just market their sponsors, but market themselves.
100%.
Traditional marketing has always been about an athlete marketing the brands. I'm sponsored by Nike. Look at me wearing Nike shoes. And I'm sponsored by Motorola. Look at me using Motorola. But today, if the athlete is the brand, then that equity value of that athlete rises. Any brand that associates with it rises. You don't have to just sell product when you're being sponsored. You can increase the value of a brand by increasing its brand equity. And that means usually increasing your own brand equity. Look at Red Bull versus a no-name drink.
100%.
Red Bull it's sugar water. They're all sugar water with caffeine.
Right.
But one is branded very highly.
Yeah.
And those are the lessons that you can learn is in marketing. Marketing is about so much more than just promoting a product or a price or a place or a promotion. Marketing is about creating that emotional connection between whoever might use that product and that product itself. So you can do that through off-road very easily because, let me get to this part. In off-road, you have your endemics and your non-endemics. Your endemic brands, and those are the ones that are in off-road. The wheel companies, the tire companies, suspension, the parts companies. They help racers race. They help racers go faster. They help racers stay in a race longer. And those are the endemics. They built the industry. Then you have non-endemic brands, the beverage companies, some food companies, clothing companies. They have zero impact on actual performance other than money they might contribute.
Right.
So when it comes to sponsorships, I always recommend teams try to partner with brands that make them more functional and have that just be a product or a discount or a media partnership. Partner with those brands that will make you faster and better and perform better. And those are the endemics. But if you want money, then you have to seek the non-endemics. And I got that idea because you were mentioning the deodorant company.
Sure.
Deodorants doesn't make your car go faster, but they have a lot of money for marketing. Look at the money that some of these brands are spending. It's insane. So if you're going for money sponsors, go for the non-endemics. Make them pay to play. Whereas the brands that are helping support the series, help support the teams, the cars, they can usually get away with functionality and parts.
I totally agree. I think, too, to reiterate our position, it's like, if you race with us, we will promote you.
Right.
Right? That is our job,
Nice.
not just to promote our league, but to talk about you, right? And what you're accomplishing and why you're special, right? And we want that. We want all of our teams to be, successful on the track, but also marketing-wise, right? I think the other thing that people need to wrap their head around is the power that we have, right? So it's funny because I said it the other day in this summit that I was speaking at. It's like, they asked me, okay, cool. So what does Unlimited Off-Road Racing sell comparative to all these other brands? And I said, well, I'm not sure what these other brands ultimately sell, but I sell freedom. I sell that feeling that when you get into your vehicle and nobody can call you on your cell phone and
Nice.
Facebook, it doesn't matter. Like it melts away, and for 6 hours, you're absolutely free. Now, same thing if you're a spectator. You go to this event, and you're like, holy cow! You're out in nature. It's beautiful, right? Maybe that leads to you participating. Maybe not. You get a little bite of freedom. Same thing with the teams and so on and so forth. Like that's ultimately what we sell.
And was that the C conference where you were in Vegas?
Yeah,
that was a big conference. That just this past week.
It was really cool.
I looked that up, and there were like 50 to 100 CEOs and presidents of major brands and series and sanctioning bodies.
This was the first year. I was excited to be involved.
Congratulations!
And I want to do more in the future. Like I sat in some of the other panels and listened to different people from all over the sports and entertainment industry, and it was I learned stuff, and it was really cool to meet some of those people, and Vegas is the perfect place for it because of the evolution that it's going through with sports and entertainment. So it was a lot of fun.
So you just made me think of something totally tangent, but on topic. When I go to conferences, the way I meet sponsors is I never sit and listen to the speakers. Because speakers are usually the sponsors. They're usually the marketing directors, brand managers, presidents, CEOs, whatever. They're the people you want to meet. They're not sitting there listening to the other speakers. You know where they are? When the speeches are happening, they're outside pacing the halls. They're getting a coffee. They're prepping. They're getting ready.
Sure.
And afterwards, they are just relaxed, and they go outside, and they're like, oh, that felt good. It's over.
Yeah.
So I walk the halls, and I'm outside the conference, and that's where I meet 90% of new people at conferences. It's not because the person you're sitting next to at a table with 10 others, you're all eating a standard meal. It's the people in the hallways.
Yeah.
So I'll look at the session titles, who's speaking and when, and then right before and or right afterwards, I'm in the hallway finding that person, bump into them. Hey, that was a great presentation. I agree. I have a question. And then you start a relationship. I got a question about what you said. Oh, I'll explain more. Boom.
Yeah.
Here's my email. You connect and then form friendships.
That's great advice. What would be the number one thing you would tell a racer, about sponsorship?
So if you go to trade shows like SEMA or PRI, there's such, or this conference where you just were, there's such useful tools to meet people and form relationships. But what most drivers and teams do is they cut off those relationships before they even start because they start selling. Use those events to meet people. If you're going to SEMA, people are at SEMA to sell their product to distributors and retail stores, and they're trying to sell to their customers.
Right.
Don't give them a sales pitch. They're not listening. Or if they pretend like they're listening, they're not. They're waiting for the next person who they might be able to sell to. You can go to these events a day in advance and help them set up, or a day afterwards, and you can help them tear down their booth. Or you can show up the next day and you can bring them a pizza while they're tearing down the booth and get to know them. Hey, like Rockstar showing up with Makita, or Makita showing up with Rockstar at construction job sites. You show up at a trade show as the marketing team is tearing down the booth, assuming it's not all drayage through unions. Some are, some aren't. And then you get to know them. You're hanging out, you're having a drink, you're eating a pizza, you're helping them carry the stuff. You get to know them, you exchange cards. It's much easier to meet people and form those relationships if you don't have an agenda of trying to sell. The agenda is you want to get to know them. And sometimes you meet people that you don't like or they don't like you. That happens.
Yeah.
That's going to happen. We don't like everybody we meet, and not everybody who meets us likes us.
Yeah.
But if there's a person in marketing and they're intelligent and you are able over time to describe what you do and what your role is and what series you're involved with, what sanctioning body you own, what television media you create, a smart marketer is going to go, tell me more. Tell me more about what you do.
Yeah.
And then you start to get into your pitch. Most drivers start pitching way too soon.
Yeah.
And that's the number one piece of advice is don't sell exposure. Nobody needs exposure. Just the small companies that have no money. They need exposure, but they're not going to pay you. Sell yourself. Be their friend.
Right.
And meet them and network with them on their time so you're not wasting their time. If they're at a trade show, they're trying to sell to someone else.
Yep.
If you're trying to sell to them, you're only going to annoy them, and they're not going to call you back. And also decks and proposals. That's another really big one. If you're approaching someone for the first time and they've asked you now, let's say you approach somebody, you've gotten to know them a little bit, and now they want to know more. A deck is what you do to really capture their attention and start that conversation and about your team, your sanctioning body, your series. A deck can be eye candy. A deck can be a video. A deck is anything to get a conversation started. Once you have that conversation started and you know them and they answer your email or you have their number, they're answering your phone calls, now you can start to move over towards understanding what it is their business needs are. What new product lines are you launching this year? Because usually bigger budgets go to new product lines.
Sure.
Marketing has a budget, and that budget's always consistent. But as Dave Gallen from Monster Energy said, if there's a good idea, we'll look at it. We'll find the money to make it happen. They have a standard marketing budget, but they'll find money if something good pops up. Find out what a brand is looking to do, especially new product launch. That's where the budget's going to be. Once you know their new products and once you know that they have a budget to market that, maybe you can find a way to help them promote that through your racing. When that time comes, then you send a proposal.
Right.
Now, proposal's not eye candy. Proposal is a specific document, usually a Word document, that shows what deliverables you can give and offer that might have valuable or might be of value to them and what you expect in return. I can give you a 1-year time. I can go to the following events. I can create the following media. In exchange, I need your help with this media. I need your help with this transportation. Maybe you can pay these bills. You can buy me a new awning, buy a new this, that, some money support, some product support. And when you piece it together that way, then there's a much more likely and higher probability that the marketing director will look at you as a professional business relationship that will lead to more sales of the brand or creating content or productivity or equity for the brand, and then they'll most likely work with you.
Yeah.
But if you just go there, first time you meet somebody, you start to offer them exposure. Coke doesn't need exposure. Monster doesn't need exposure. Red Bull doesn't need exposure.
Yeah.
They need a lot of things, but not exposure.
No, that's sound advice. So thank you for doing this. That was awesome.
Thanks for the invite, Matt.
Yeah,
this is great.
We'll have to do a second part to this because there's so much information to get out there.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what, we'll continue on August 20. August 20 is going to be the Off-Road Sponsorship Summit. You're going to be on it.
Yep.
We have quite a few people on it. We're going to talk about all that, how to meet sponsors, what they value, how to value your program, how to put a dollar value on it, and how to create value out of nothing. You don't have to race anymore, but we'll have a lot of experts who are doing really good and hopefully draw more in.
Awesome. I look forward to it.
Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thank you.
Be good.